Hello, Jamaica Kincaid, and hello, all the viewers. And you are all very welcome to the International Writers Stage in Gothenburg, Göteborgs internationella författarscen. And today we will talk about your latest book in Swedish, which is called My Garden Book, and you published it in America in 1999.
Your books, both your fiction and non-fiction, has meant a lot to me as a writer and as a reader, but also as a gardener. And I'm so glad that my favorite garden book now is published in Swedish at Tranan Publishing House. And it is translated by Niklas Nilsson. And you have written a new introduction and exclusive to the Swedish edition. And it has been very well received in Sweden. And I wonder, how was it for you to go back to this book 2 decades later?
I would say I didn't have to return to the book. The thoughts in it, the views in it, I have never left me. In fact, I can amplify. I've amplified on them. The book was just sort of the surface of my thinking. The general view of the garden is that it offers a space to not think of life, not think of contemporary living or history. It offers a respite from, say, the troubles in the world or just existence. It's generally the garden is regarded as a source of relief. But I find the opposite, and I am delighted by that. I find the garden is extremely disturbing and full of almost all the violations, the human violations in the world, and I think, you know, I always refer to the certainly the Judeo-Christian, and I think Islam also has within it the garden as the source of human transgression and human flaws. And so I always begin there. But even before the beginning of the creation of the garden in the Bible, I go back to the very creation story itself. And so it will lead me to thoughts of the world, the earth is created, but the garden is designed. And so what is the difference between creation and design is, and you know, all sorts of philosophical questions about that. So that, you know, I will think, well, one thing thinking about that story of creation has led me to see that there must have been other worlds that God made, because when it says, and saw that it was good, must mean that there were others that were not as good. So they were discarded, is one of the ways I come to look at it. So then after I am tired, exhausted myself with that way of looking, and it's not religious at all. I'm not interested in it in religion. I'm interested in it as an idea of how we are. And then I go to the garden, and the garden, the creation of the garden seems to bridge creation and design, and because the garden is purposely laid out. There is no doubt of how the garden appears. The description of the garden is, and this happened and that happened. There is no, and saw that it was good. By the time the garden appears, the gardener knows exactly what he, she, they expect from it. So those are the kinds of disturbances and thoughts that I have when I'm in the garden. And then, of course, it leads me to the naming of things and how naming something puts it, freezes it, so that it becomes the possession of the person who has named it, and the what gives its name, who gives it its name, determines everything about it. It's a incredible imperial act to name something. You name something, it is yours. And you really can understand that in the beginnings, early beginnings of the European adventure into the rest of the world after 1492. I'm very interested in the world as it begins on that day in August 1492, that Columbus sailed. For me, there isn't really, in my life, there isn't any moment as profound as that. And incidentally, as I'm sure everybody knows, the day Columbus left Spain is the day the Inquisition started. And so I will make some kind of circuitous route with that, the Inquisition and Columbus's adventures in the world. And this is all while I'm in the garden. I'll make some circuitous route through the hundreds of years to the Holocaust in the 1940s, in Germany. I'll make some, and if you really look at it, you'll see the culmination of that, because one of the quarrels the Germans had with the rest of Europe is that they didn't get enough Black people to exploit, essentially. They felt cheated out of the slave trade, the Industrial Revolution, that the work of the slaves produced, and the body of wealth that the slaves produced, and the wealth the slaves produced happens to be in the vegetable kingdom for the most part, cotton, sugar, and so on. It's the vegetable kingdom. So I make all those connections while I'm planting, roses or something. Yeah, I go there, as the kids say. She's going to go there. Yes, I go there.
That is what's so interesting and unique with your garden book, how you mix your personal history with a much wider sense of history. And could you tell us a little bit of how it started for you when you came into the garden? Because I know your gardening is also, your writing is also your gardening, and
yes,
your thinking is your writing. So everything is linked together.
Yes. How did it come? Oh gosh, I suppose once again I can trace it to that great source in my life, my mother. She actually comes from a family who you would call landed on the island of Dominica. And I think she spent a lot of her childhood growing things. Her family grew bananas, citrus fruits, spices. I remember they grew cloves and coffee. They grew all sorts of things that they consumed and also sold and perhaps exported to other islands, though to call it exporting is really too grand. It wasn't, people would just go from island to island with things they had grown. Um, but she had a particularly personal and ferocious relationship with the vegetable kingdom. And it was magnificent and terrifying to see. She would eat something and like the taste of it, and then gather the seed of it and plant it. And then inevitably, whatever she grew would turn into a monster. It would, I've written about this, once she ate a soursop and she liked it. She grew the soursop tree. And then she ate a passion fruit, and it was particularly good. So she grew the passion fruit up the soursop tree, which weakened the soursop tree and made it vulnerable to ants. The ants then would go into her house, and she got so annoyed at the whole process that she set the tree on fire. Those are incidents, I suppose, that you would not notice and so why did I notice them? Well, because I was obsessed with this person, my mother, and her travails in the world, her not just travails, but her journey in the world. I was just, oh, wow, that's how does that happen? And of course, I spent most of my life to this day trying to step out of the path of her incredible force, so that the metaphorical breadfruit tree didn't fall on me. So yes, I would say that is the source of my interest in the in the garden, and in the world. As a child, I was most interested in three subjects which turn out to meet in the garden: history, geography, and botany. And they make a triangle in the garden. Certainly for me, I can see that most people in the garden ignore those three subjects altogether and rightly find spirituality in the garden. I do find a spiritual connection in the garden in this, I'll tell you. For instance, it is demonstrably true, not just a narcissistic observation on my part, but it is demonstrably true that the plants I have in my garden are taller than the literature say they should be, and and they're stooped just like me. And I think, oh, that's us speaking to each other. Yes, we have a very the garden, my garden, and me have a very intense relationship, and I am glad I was able to see it and honor it.
You write in your book about a wisteria, blåräng in Swedish, that blooms later than it's supposed to bloom. And when I find irregularities like that today in our garden, for instance, two of the butterflies, migrating species, didn't come this year, that worries me a lot, because in 1999, this problem wasn't really known, but today we also face the climate change. Does that worry you? And do you see irregularities in your garden?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this year we had monarchs late. All summer we saw none. Last year we had many. And then this year we had only a few in September, which is very late. I thought to myself, well, how are you going to get to Mexico? Because they migrate somewhere in Mexico. The monarchs that we have, the monarchs that cannot come over the Rocky Mountains, the Western monarchs, which apparently are smaller, they have supposedly vanished, and because their habitat has been destroyed. Yeah, that worries worry is not even the word, just sort of like, inward. There's an inward gasp you have when you realize that, things have changed or are changing. For many years, well, maybe for about, let me just say 5, 6 years, we had no bats. They had been suffering from some virus that made their throats not able to close up. So, and I was sort of ambivalent about that because I'm afraid of bats for no reason at all, just the way they look. And actually, I'm afraid of mice, and I think of bats as mice with large skirts.
Yeah.
So I was sort of glad that, I could sit outside and not see these mice with skirts above me. But then they came back this year, and I wasn't afraid of them anymore. It was all right. I was glad to see them, a few. But we used to have bats, so many bats. The children would throw fruit at them and see them dive for it. It was sort of fun. I would run inside when that happened. If you were to say to me, the coronavirus was engineered by the other creatures in the world in some little scientific lab they have in the woods to get rid of us, I would buy that. I would buy that. It's so interesting to listen to Europeans talk about migrants and, people coming from everywhere, when we all know the most aggressive migrants in the history of the last 500 years were Europeans going out into other people's countries and changing their ways and so on. And of course, you hear invasive species. Don't bring that invasive species. The most invasive species is the human race. And so I am willing to buy the idea that there's some little bird or family of mammals that have a little lab, and they sent the coronavirus to humans to, tamper down. We are just the worst, really. Yeah. I mean, we essentially, I think, have made the idea of thought disreputable, or intelligence disreputable. I now sometimes think intelligence is a form of stupidity. A thought I had in the garden, incidentally.
Do you think we should go back to the history in the garden and your garden as a narrative? Because when we visited you in your beautiful home and garden in Vermont, we were talking a lot about that, the garden as a narrative. And also in your book, the history is always present.
Yes.
And could you tell the audience a little bit more about that? Because that's a very specific view on gardening that often are...
History that you find in the garden.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I became, or I'm really aware of that, given where I come from, that almost everything that is of interest in the West Indies, almost 2 or 3 or 4, maybe no more than 10 things are native to the Caribbean. So many things that would have formed a child's life, my life. The mango season, the tamarind season, the plum season, various things, would not have been from the West Indies. The mango is from India, or mostly tamarind, India, I think not Africa. I'm trying to think the things that we would have gotten, I suppose root vegetables, but just sort of, would have shaped a child's life in regard to food, would not have come from the West Indies and would have been brought there for reasons that are, really vile. Would have been bought. The breadfruit was brought to the islands to feed slaves because the slaves took up too much time growing their own food, and the breadfruit is a source of calories that grows without any care, really, it just grows. And so there is that. The mango would be, mango season would have formed my life in that, oh, mangoes are coming. And I would eat mangoes until my teeth hurt. Or another thing I would have learned is that if I had a few fruits, I should eat the best ones first, because someone would come along and say, oh, can I have one? And then I would have had to give them the best ones because those are the ones that were left. So little things like that, would have made me, think of history. How did the mango come to Antigua? Or the hibiscus is native to Africa. So I would have I never, for instance, noticed when I lived there that cotton, which would have been native to the islands, had a beautiful flower. The interesting thing about cotton is that it's native to places that are close to the equator all around the world. If you follow cotton, and it has different lengths, different strands, but it's native to. So, it's as if nature or whatever was providing a nice bit of clothing for people who lived in hot places, and then you would think of that, and then at least I would think of that and think, oh, how wonderful. And then will remember that the Empress Josephine, who was born in Martinique, and then went to France, had her cotton clothes sent to Martinique to be washed because the sun was better there. That's just hilarious and evil, So yes, in the garden, that would be one of the things I think about. And I actually grow cotton. I never get any actual cotton, but beautiful flowers. I love the flowers of cotton. And then I sit over the cotton plant, or I stand over it and look at it and think, why was this beautiful plant brought into this realm of evil? This beautiful, generous thing, giving up its fruit to people who live along the equator to shield themselves from one thing or the other. Why did they bring it into this demented evil of fueling the Industrial Revolution, which is a disaster for the earth, the Industrial Revolution? So there.
Yeah. But I was listening to a historical talk by Monty Don, and he was talking about the history of the English garden. And in just one sentence, he said that, well, the wealth and prosperity was pouring into Britain by the slave trade, the cotton, the sugar, and that's why the rich people had to buy land and create gardens. Yep. And that is the thing we don't really think about that when we are walking in the British garden.
Yeah. And I would imagine he has read something I have written.
Yes, I think so too, because it was at least one sentence.
Yes, because no one ever admitted that before. No one. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I had never seen it before. And I was astonished when I started to write about the garden that, in a way, it made me really kind of angry. Don't you see this? The great English house is the product of the slave trade and the work of the labor of the slaves. The Luddites were not people who were opposed to technology. They were people who were losing their jobs to mechanization because before, weaving was done by them. And suddenly it became mechanized and they were no longer necessary. The reason weaving became mechanized is because there was so much cotton coming from the American South and the West Indies, and you had to make it into something, and then you had to sell it, and mostly sell it back to us, and then the British were in India, and India then being what is now Pakistan also, who had this incredible industry of weaving, and they just took it and brought it to Manchester. So then you have cloth like Madras and all these various weaves of cloth that were then being brought to Manchester, and the what is it in France, all this stuff. I mean, basically, the British impoverished India. India had the third largest economy in the world when the British came. When the British left, they had the 60th, And what's also interesting to me, which Monty Don wouldn't have noticed, is that I was always shocked at how poor ordinary English people were. I would just think when I went there, I said, well, what happened to all the stuff we sent you? And it turns out just the 1% of them got it. Also, it's always the fucking 1%. Sorry
Yes.
for my French. But all of that, I will think in the garden. When I see an English garden, there's hardly ever anything native to England in an English garden. You can find the world, starting with the American colonies, in an English garden. At first, an English garden just had a lot of native plants to the American landscape. Oh, you didn't think I would go there, but I've thought about it.
Yes. Yes.
You could go to. You'd never know that Montezuma had extraordinary gardens in Mexico, and the Spaniards just sent it to Europe. The most famous, or well. The dahlia, but also tagates and zinnias, who's named after Dr. Nicholas Zinn, a German doctor. It's just on and on. You just think,
Yes.
yeah, it's both.
Sorry, but should we talk a little bit about George Clifford and Linnaeus?
My
yes,
favorite.
because we are in Sweden. Do we have time?
Yes.
About naming too.
Yes, it's in George Clifford's house. George Clifford is described in the most benign way as an Anglo-Dutch banker. Basically, he was in charge of the Dutch East India Company, and means he was pillaging Indonesia and places like that. And he had all these plants in a greenhouse, and Linnaeus, on his way to England, stopped by. Oh, he was also a hypochondriac, as rich people tend to be. Linnaeus stopped by and spent 2 years with him, and went through his greenhouse and named the plants, which was very important in establishing the Linnaean binomial system, and published a book which I spent a few $100s acquiring, called Hortus Cliffortianus. And it's in Latin, so I have to have a Latin dictionary to read it. So that is the story of Linnaeus. Now, Linnaeus, a lot of people, especially people of color, find him very disturbing. I don't. I actually am a great fan, and I've read. I mean, I see, now this is where I think it's so interesting that his family's name comes from the linden tree, and the name is before he was born. And so then it turns out that the descendant of the linden tree is the person who is responsible for the naming of plants in the world. That's where I find the invisible thread, the spiritual yes, in the garden. Who could have predicted that a person named after the linden tree, is that not, what is that? So I love Linnaeus. Well, love. I'm a great fan of. People say, "Oh, well, he was a racist." Well, at that point, who wasn't a racist? Yes, he was I think the trouble is people who say, "I wasn't a racist." Yeah, he was a racist. It's okay. He was a racist. Now move on. Yeah, but I can't wait to visit Uppsala just to see. Yeah.
Jamaica, the time is running out, but I have one
Sorry,
last question for you. I read a quote from you here from the book. I shall never have the garden I have in my mind, but that for me is the joy of it. So what have you in mind for your garden for next season?
Oh, well, for next season, I have already started. I just planted a dozen poppies called Papaver bractea, and it's a poppy that's native to Iran. It doesn't have any. It does have an opiate quality. It has something that will make you do something, but on the whole, growing your plants for drugs is so tedious. It's better to buy it. So I am not growing it for this sensation. But well, that's the other thing about the garden. You're always, for me anyway, I'm always living in the future, the past, and then the present. And the present is always so much work. There's the immediacy of the garden, and it's a lot of physical work. But the past and the future are that's the reward of the garden to come and the garden that was. So the garden I have in mind is always to come or was, but it's never the one in front of me. If it was, I would just give up. What's the point?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Jamaica.
I hope I didn't bore you too much.
No.
Never.
Never.
It's impossible. Oh, it was wonderful to talk to you again.
Wonderful to see you, really. As soon as this is all over, I'm coming.
Yes, please.
You're very welcome.
You are very, very welcome. And we'll go to Hammarby in Uppsala, Linnaeus.
And you will meet your Swedish audience as well,
yes.
all your readers.
Audience.
So.
Oh my goodness, I'm so touched by that. It's so wonderful to, yes, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers who have been watching. Thanks a lot.